I've had the iPhone 14 Pro Max for about 3 months now, and this is my final verdict. So I think I've spent long enough now with the iPhone 14 Pro Max to form quite a rounded opinion on it. And the first thing to say is that, bearing in mind I switched from the tiny little iPhone 13 mini, which I still absolutely love by the way, bearing in mind I went from this to this, that switch has been quite straightforward. However, if you've reached this video, you're probably still thinking whether or not to spend a huge amount of money on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So I understand your hesitation about buying this phone, but I know that you're very keen. So this is my final verdict on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Before I get started, just a very quick word from today's sponsor, which is Benks. I love Benks. I love all of their accessories. They are fantastic. And today I want to talk about one in particular, which is this Kevlar protective case for the iPhone 14. It's basically like a Kevlar suit for your phone, which sounds a bit elaborate and a bit strange, but that's exactly what it is because it's made out of Kevlar. And that basically means it's really tough. You can drop this thing and it won't damage your phone. It also protects the phone all the way around. There's no gaps on the outside edge, which I know bothers some people, so you've got no issue there. You've got very tough, very nice to use metal buttons. That's quite a rarity. It is made from a TPU frame, which gives you better drop resistance, and it uses advanced injection molding technology for a seamless design, which I can confirm is seamless. It's MagSafe compatible as well, so you can still stick all of your MagSafe things to the back of it. It's got a soft internal fiber lining, which means you don't scratch your phone when you put it into the case. It's nice and light, nice and grippy. It's got this very nice, simple, minimalist design on it, not too garish. And the best news is I've worked with Benks to get a fantastic deal for you guys. Basically, if you use the code REALKEVLAR at checkout, you get $20 off this case. That brings it down to $19.99, which for a Kevlar case like this is fantastic. However, it is limited to the first 200 people who make the order, so you've got to be quick. I'll put a link in the description, and yeah, go and check out this fantastic case from Benks. So the first thing I'm going to say about the iPhone 14 Pro Max is a bit of a negative one, I'm afraid, and that's the fact that this phone didn't win my completely made up Smartphone of the Year award for 2022. The phone that did pick up that award is the Pixel 7 Pro from Google, which is brilliant, and it's also in the UK £350 cheaper than the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I can't look past that, I'm afraid. I also can't look past the fact that the Pixel 7 Pro is just as good as Apple's flagship. In fact, in certain areas, subjectively, it's better. Firstly, there's the aforementioned saving, which is significant between these two phones. Secondly, I think, and this is subjective, but I think the Pixel 7 Pro takes better photos. That is just my opinion, and admittedly, when it comes to video, the iPhone is still king. So if you want a fantastic video shooting smartphone, this is the one to get. The build quality is pretty much as good as the iPhone 14 Pro Max. The display is the same size, it's the same quality once again, which is why the Pixel 7 Pro is a better value phone. And the other problem for the iPhone 14 Pro Max is, I'm sorry, it's another Google phone, and it's the Pixel 6a, which at £399 is an absolute screaming bargain. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has some serious competition, and I haven't even mentioned things like the Nothing Phone 1, which again is the same size as this, is just as fast as this, and that is about £399 as well. And for that reason, straight off the bat, if you're struggling to justify paying for this phone, I would look at what the other competitors have to offer. There are some novelties that you get with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but, and I'm sorry that if this all sounds a bit negative, they all wear off quite quickly. And there's three that are worth mentioning. The first is the dynamic island, which is okay. And it's one of those things, when I first reviewed this phone, I mentioned the fact that the dynamic island is one of those things which makes you feel like you've got a brand new iPhone straight away. And we've not had that for a long time. There's not been this kind of one defining feature that feels very fresh out of the box. But dynamic island is exactly that kind of feature. It's completely different to the notch. It does things, you know, it kind of animates and things pop into it and pop out of it. So it does feel very fancy to begin with. The problem is that that fanciness wears off, like I say, pretty quickly. And the reason for that is because Dynamic Island isn't being put to much use at the moment. Even iOS doesn't make that much use of it at the moment, so you get your music going up into Dynamic Island whenever you flick up your now playing thing. The timer goes into there. You see the charging status go into there as well. There's AirDrop, incoming calls. There are some strange omissions, so the stopwatch doesn't go into Dynamic Island, which is weird. And then we've got third-party developers who, in my experience, aren't making much use of it either. In fact, the only one that I've seen using it, and using it pretty well, admittedly, is Ringo, the parking app. So when you park your car and start the parking session, that parking session goes into Dynamic Island, and it's a great way just to reference how much time you've got left. But even that wears off quickly and just becomes part of the system. And that is the whole point of Dynamic Island at the moment. It just becomes part of the iPhone. Then we have the always on display, which received a lot of flack to begin with, understandably. It was too bright, you couldn't customize it, it was just too always on. Apple has thankfully made some tweaks to it now, so you can change it to not display your wallpaper and to hide notifications. But again, a bit like Dynamic Island, it just becomes part of the iPhone. And this isn't a bad thing, it's what should happen with these kind of features, but if you're buying an iPhone based on the Dynamic Island and or the always on display, you're going to be sorely disappointed pretty quickly. Lastly, we have the 48 megapixel camera, which I've tested and is pretty impressive. You get lots of detail out of it, you can do lots of tweaking to those photos, and at times they look like DSLR quality images. You might try it out and be impressed by it, but unless you're using this phone professionally for that reason, you're not going to make use of that 48 megapixel sensor. You've got to want to work with raw images and spend that time editing them after you've shot them, and most people can't be bothered. So again, the novelty of that wears off pretty quickly. It's not all bad news, don't worry. You have to bear in mind that I'm a tech reviewer, so my opinion of the iPhone 14 Pro Max is often tainted by the number of phones I get to use. If you've got a budget that suits this phone, and you want the iPhone, and more importantly, you love Apple stuff and you love the ecosystem, then you're not going to be disappointed by the iPhone 14 Pro Max at all. This is an amazing phone. It's built like a tank, it's beautifully designed, it's got that fantastic marriage of iOS and Apple hardware. Despite what I've said about the Pixel and the 48 megapixel sensor in this, it does take stunning photos, and it's the best, I think, video shooter on the market. And if you want the absolute best iPhone available, you have to get the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It's got the biggest display, it's got all of the new latest features. You just can't get a better iPhone than this when it comes to the best of everything. And as much as I love the Google Pixel 7 Pro, if I leave this at home by mistake, which does happen occasionally, I miss the camera system, absolutely, but I don't miss the rest of this phone as much as I'd miss this phone if I left this one at home. And that's because there are so many things within the Apple ecosystem that I rely on for my business that if this isn't in my world for just a day, it causes serious issues. We've reached a point now where the iPhone 14 Pro Max is for serious die-hard Apple fans, or people like me who use them professionally and are welded within the Apple ecosystem. If you sit within either of those camps, then this is a fantastic buy. However, if you've got this far in this video and you're still thinking, that's so much money, I'm not sure if I want to spend it, then get a cheaper iPhone. Go for the iPhone 14, the regular. That's a fantastic phone, nothing wrong with it. Or if you still want that premium flagship experience and you're not quite as invested in Apple as I am, get the Google Pixel 7 Pro. And on that note, if you want to find out why this was my smartphone of the year for 2022, keep watching for a link to that video.